Welcome to Closing the Growth Gap for May 23rd, 2024. I'm Ben Scanlon, co-founder of Mosaic Growth Solutions. We have a number of great topics to get to today. First, Dave Kellogg shows us how to open new markets. Then Patrick Cumming says B2B marketers have become so obsessed with data, they have lost their ability to think critically. And then Howley says the tide is turning in marketing. So let's get started.
Okay, a couple days ago, I shared Kantar's blueprint for brand growth, which is their massive study of over 14 data from over 14,000 companies that laid out a framework for growing brands. So it's pretty cool. I'd definitely take a look at it. But within their framework, one of their growth accelerators was to find new spaces. And that's finding new people to sell to. And I totally agree. And I call this open new markets. And so the key is how can you expand your business? How can you find new people to sell to beyond what you're already doing? And so this is a really effective growth lever. But the thing about it is, it's one thing to say that, to show data showing how effective this is, but it's another thing to actually go and do it. So how do you actually go find new markets, open new markets? How do you find new spaces? Well, we're in luck. Dave Kellogg, who I think is one of the smartest guys out there, actually just did a webinar maybe 3 weeks ago. And he did a webinar recording and he shared his slides. So definitely go check those things out because I'm just going to touch upon some of these things at a high level. So definitely go take a look at what Dave put together. But I did want to touch upon some of these because I think it's very instructive. And the title of it is Opening New Markets, the key to efficient growth in 2024 and beyond. So this sounds exactly like what we want to talk about here. And so he started off by saying, how do we drive efficient growth, which I think everyone wants to know the answer to. And some of it's efficiency and then expansion, which is what we want to talk about. And the expansion, he says, happens along 5 dimensions: new products, new use cases, new industries, new geographies, and new channels. And this is the strategic market expansion hypercube. And anything called hypercube has to be pretty cool. And I'm not going to go into all the details here because there's so much great data. But one of the things I do want to highlight is this golden rule of risk expansion, which is don't move on the diagonal or always keep a pivot foot. And what this means is not to do 2 new things at once. That's the danger zone. So you don't want to open in a new geography with a new product or a new channel and a new geography. So don't do 2 new things at once. Just move over 1 square, and that will keep your risk lower. And then he shares some real life violations of the no diagonal rule. So a lot of great content in here. And then there's the rule of humility. And so at its core is be humble before the market expansion gods. And it seems simple, but it can get hard fast. And I like this. It's not about what you think, it's about what they think. So keep that in mind as you open your new markets. Think about what they're thinking about you and what you're presenting. He says, now let's take a look at each of the dimensions. Now I'm going to skip over product expansion. I mean, I think it is a big opportunity for growth, but adding a new product can be a heavy lift. It can be significant, and it's something that really needs to be thought about strategically in terms of your approach. And so I'm going to skip over this. When I think about opening new markets, new products are interesting, but I think there's easier opportunities there's other dimensions that are easier in terms to take advantage of, especially if you're looking to grow more quickly. And the use case expansion is probably the best example of this. And customers use products to solve a variety of problems. Some prefer a jobs to be done framing, hire products to do certain jobs for them, which is roughly equivalent. And so this is a great opportunity to open new markets, which is just to find new use cases for your product. And so like you think about WD-40, which started as a lubricant, and then I think people use it for cleaning, or, baking soda, which, started with for baking, and then now people put it in the refrigerator as in cleaning supplies and toothpaste. So there's additional opportunities to sell to new people when you expand the use case. So this is a great way to open new markets. Industry expansion, selling to new industries. And so there's challenges with this. He says the lack of references is a big challenge, but people really want to know that you're committed to the industry and that you know what you're talking about. So you have to do your market research. You have to be able to talk the talk, and so that they want to work with you. But industry expansion is another great way. geographic expansion. And we've worked with a lot of clients who are actually trying to expand into America, and this can be challenging. And I don't think it's quite as extensive as taking on a new product, but it can be challenging because you have to think about, what does your website look like? What hours is your team working? How are they speaking about things? Again, the references is a big thing. Is this a product that's is this a company that has worked in America before? So I think geographic expansion can be challenging, but another way to open new markets. If you have a great product in whatever country you're in, the potential is there for it to be a great product someplace else. And so looking at geographic expansion and then channel expansion, he says there's two types of partners: channels who sell your software, take paper, or alliances who don't and typically co-sell with you as a result. And one of the interesting things I found here is he said alliances are often a great source of leads and opties. Target 10 to 20% of your pipeline over time. So that's a significant contributor. But I wanted to highlight this because it's one thing, like as I said, it's one thing to say open new markets or find new spaces, but how do you actually do it? And luckily, Dave has this webinar and these materials that kind of walk you through opportunities to open new markets. And that's literally what his presentation is called. So definitely take a look at what Dave's put together here and learn how you can do this, because as Kantar showed in their research, this is a powerful mechanism to drive growth. It's one of their 3 growth accelerators. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at what Dave put together here. Let's take a look at this post from Patrick Cumming. Sad reality. B2B marketers are so obsessed with data, they've lost their ability to think. That's a pretty bold statement. I don't know if all B2B marketers are so obsessed with data, but there's definitely them out there. And I love data, so but I hope I can still think. We blindly trust data to make strategic decisions and fear making them based on fundamental marketing principles that require critical thinking. And I don't even know, I mean, yes, that's definitely an aspect of it, but data can be a crutch. But there are some things in marketing that are just true. There has to be marketing foundations that don't need data, and they don't need to be tested into, and they don't need to be proven all the time. If you're going to operate that way, where you say everything needs to be tested, everything needs data to support it, then you're going to move very, very slowly. For instance, like defining your target market, defining your ICP. Like, you shouldn't need to go through and test that you're going to define your ICP. I think there's enough research out there saying that this is a good idea, and enough companies have done this, and it makes logical sense that you don't need a test into doing that. But there's many other things like that are just foundational to successful marketing and don't require testing. But he provides this example. We'll look into Google Ads and see that 90% of pipeline came from software terms and just 10% from tools or solutions. Data-driven marketers say, let's rebrand and only use the term software in all of our marketing. The data supports it and there's statistical significance. B2B marketers dream, right? But let's pause and actually think for a second. Do we really believe the decision to purchase a $35,000 average order value SaaS product was won or lost based on whether we use the word software or tool or solution? And as he says, it kind of sounds ridiculous when you think about it. You're investing all this money, the word they use doesn't really matter that much. He says, of course it wasn't. It was won or lost based on the fundamental marketing principles. You solved an urgent problem. You were discoverable on a relevant channel. You were top of mind from repeated touch points, and you had an obvious point of differentiation that made you the superior choice. So those are a lot of the core principles for marketing and driving growth. And so those are the things that are driving the growth in this instance, not the use of the word software versus tools or solution. He says, don't get me the fact is that someone in the buying committee who properly shortlisted your product discovered you via software is incidental. Don't get me wrong, data is valuable and absolutely should inform strategic decision making, but it is not and never will be a substitute for strong fundamentals backed by critical thinking. And so, I think there's a lot here. There's data that comes from all sides. There's data that comes from below, which is like testing data and things like that, and like the example he provides here. But there's also research data that comes from above. And so you really need to think about which of this data is meaningful. What do I need to use? What things do I just know to be true? And so, everyone should have their assumptions tested, but not everything can be tested, which is my point. You won't grow if you have to go through and test everything. And so when you look at research, and I mean, even from a research perspective, some of it sounds so compelling. But I shared a video earlier where it's like a lot of the best known studies can't be replicated. And so you have to think about what the data is saying, what's it does it and what your foundation is. And so you need to make sure that you, and then the data from below, the testing, what do you need to make decisions effectively? So I think this is a really important point, that not everything needs to be tested. Not everything requires data. There should be these foundational elements of it. All right. And then wrapping up this article from Carol Howley, she says the tide is turning in marketing. The tide is turning in marketing. For years, an over reliance on lead gen tactics promised high ROI, but has gradually led to buyer indifference. And I think that's true. I think there's been performance marketing that said we can do X, we promise we could do X, but as a result, they've actually led to bad, not even buyer indifference, has led to bad buyer experience. The reality, traditional methods like gated content are losing their luster. What's needed now is an agile approach, a shift from short term fixes to a sustainable strategy that puts emphasis on long term relationships, value, and trust. And I totally agree with that. I mean, I think there's a major issue with what I call lever pulling. Is you look at the data and say, let's try this, look at more data, let's try this. You could actually like optimize yourself to failure doing that. Just saying like I need to pull these levers. What does the data say? You're not doing meaningful work. You're not, as she said, building relationships, value, and trust doing that. In fact, you can make major mistakes doing that. There's real world examples of people saying, let's test removing the cancel button or making the cancel button easy to find. And it will lower their cancellation rates if you look at that web page or you look at that specific user path. But ultimately, it leads to degrading your brand. And so, is that what you're trying to do? And ultimately, these people are going to cancel just because the button's not there, and just because that tests more positively doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. She says it's about creating a value led emotional connection with your audience. And of course, I've talked a lot about the emotional connection. It's absolutely critical in B2B SaaS because people are, I mean, these decisions in B2B SaaS weigh heavily on people because it's both about your individual career and what it means for your company. She says, here's how we can pivot to better outcomes. Shift focus from short term fixes to building brand and organic demand. Leverage optimized content across multiple platforms and formats. And I'm not sure what optimized content means, but I definitely think we should be thinking about what the buyer's trying to accomplish at each stage of the buying process and support them, provide them the content they need to work their way through to help them make their decision. But that starts with thinking about who the buyer is first and then creating an experience to help support them. Enhance credibility in search rankings with customer reviews, even right down to email signatures. A tool 89% of US marketers find valuable. And this is, I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of word of mouth, a big fan of doing what you can do to support peer reviews. So I absolutely agree with this point. And there's ways to, you can't double your word of mouth, you can't make people refer you, but there are ways to help enable it. The easier you make it for people, the more likely they're going to do it. So gain that credibility and then help them talk about you. And then finally, she says, consider adjusting your budget to allocate 60% to direct demand gen and 40% to brand building endeavors that may be harder to measure but are crucial for long-term success. And the percentages, I'm not sure about. I'm not sure what percentage should go to brand building versus direct demand gen. I definitely think more needs to be invested in brand. And it's the reason why people don't is because it's harder to measure. But I do think there's ways to get better visibility on it. I shared previously about Les Benet's share of search, and I shared another video that showed that people who were investing in influencers were able to see their branded searches go up, and then branded searches contribute to growth. And so I think that methodology helps you make these decisions, but it's not short term. It's not immediate. These investments in brand don't show up tomorrow. And so that's frustrating, but you have to manage those expectations to say, look, we're going to invest in brand. There's a ton of research out there showing how beneficial it is, but it's not going to happen immediately. And so you have to get buy-in on that front. But I do agree. there is a shift in terms of what's happening in marketing.